come once again to discuss things.
So let's go ahead and get into this. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Part 2. Joining me today is the one and only Deadpoolzilla, as well as the Comics Kid 2099, Ruben DeBoard.
I have reclaimed my place among Geeky Gentlemen.
Well, in all fairness, Steve is evacuating because of a fucking hurricane right now.
Unacceptable. Unacceptable. He needs to be here right now. I'm just kidding. Steve,
Yeah,
we hope you're safe.
Yeah, it's funny. This is like, I think, the second or third time someone has not been able to do the show because of a hurricane, which is just, it's a funny world we live in.
Oh, you mean a dying planet? Yeah, it's real funny.
Yeah, hilarious even. So anyway, Ruben picked our topic tonight. What are we reviewing tonight, Ruben?
Tonight we're talking about the 1994 pseudo-superhero movie, The Shadow. Try saying that 5 times fast.
Indeed. And so this is interesting because this is not only a movie I've never seen before, I've certainly heard of it, but a character I've never seen anything of before. Like, I know of the existence of the Shadow, but I've never consumed literally a thing with the Shadow in it. So yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I've seen this movie and I've collected comics of the Shadow. But the thing is like, I've only collected crossovers with the Shadow. Like, hell, I don't own it, but I've read the crossover with H.P. Lovecraft.
That seems fitting. I could see that. So I guess my question then becomes about this. Is this at all accurate to the comics and the character, or is this just completely like the movie doing its own thing?
I know just a little bit about the comics. I was reading on the trivia on this before we started recording, and it seems like this is a combination of the pulps, which I guess is the pulps were basically just really short novellas in the 30s, and then the radio show. It's kind of a combination of those. Basically, it seems like the biggest liberty that this movie takes is giving him a different secret identity than what he had in the pulps. But other than that, it seems like it's a blending of those two, from what I understand. Okay.
And see, that's interesting because, like, I've known about the Shadow Knows, and I thought the way they incorporated the whole agents and decoder ring kind of thing as a gimmick from the old radio show, I thought that was kind of interesting. But I really had no idea how much of that was, like, pre-established to the character and how much of the character was from the pulps and how much of it was from the radio show. So it's good to know that this is, like, actually got some basis in it. It's not just completely made up for the movie. Because that was, like, a really common thing in 90s superhero films, is they just use the name but basically create their own character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not like with the Dick Tracy movie where they take like a loose idea for it and just BS their way through it, and it gets really weird. Here they actually like ground it in some of the pulp novels and comics. It is interesting to note that with this story is that it does try to be a little darker, and I like that it wasn't trying to be like bright and colorful. It was actually like trying to follow what the original story was of the character.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty kooky, crazy still, but yeah.
Like at least there's like there's someone had a leash on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely got, like, a more brutal tinge to it. I mean, they start out killing people left and right, and there's, like, fair amount of blood and gore in this.
Well, that's the thing, is, like, the Shadow was, like, the 40s Punisher.
Yeah, that makes sense. Alright, so I guess I'll ask Ruben why you wanted to talk about this, then.
Well, I grew up watching this movie. It's really interesting to me that you said you've never seen it before, and that you'd never seen or that you'd never consumed anything with the Shadow. Because I mentioned earlier that this is somewhat truthful to the source material. I am very, very not familiar with the source material. I've never read any of the pulps, never listened to the radio show, so I'm only heard secondhand how faithful this is to the source material, and that's just reading online what other people are saying. But
My time has come.
yeah,
I was like, because when you were saying, Ruben was like, I know nothing about the Shadow. I was like, oh boy.
yeah. I mean, I watched this movie a bunch when I was a kid. Really liked it. And I've read some comic books with the Shadow since then. I read a Green Hornet Shadow crossover that I thought was kind of interesting. Read a couple of like the Masks series, which was like Green Hornet, Shadow, the Spider, like a whole bunch of pulp heroes teaming up together. So I've read some of that, but still, this is really the version of the Shadow that I think of when I think of the character. And I just think it's, out of all the superhero movies that predate the huge superhero boom of the 21st century, I think this is one of the best when you compare it. And what do you think?
I think that this is good. I don't want to give the impression that I didn't like this. I am still of the opinion that Mask of Zorro is not only the best Zorro movie, it's the best superhero movie from the 90s. Not that it's got a ton of competition.
Well, it had that and I'd say Mask of Zorro and The Mask.
The Mask?
Yeah, The Mask was a Dark Horse character.
No, I'm not really a superhero, though, right? Maybe. I don't know. It's definitely a really good comic book movie. You're not wrong. Yeah, that's fair. There's some pretty... It's weird because it is right before the boom of the comic book movie. But there were a lot of, like, really interesting things being done in the 90s with comic book characters.
Yeah,
and a lot of really bad things, like Steel.
Yeah. But, like, a vast majority were pulp characters. Like, you had the Phantom, you had...
The Rocketeer was kind of, sort of one.
Yeah, you had the Rocketeer, which I dug that movie. I don't care what anyone says.
Do people naysay that movie? I think that's a great movie.
I think it's just underrated, in my opinion. You also had Dick Tracy, another good... I think it's out there. It was like the 90s equivalent of The Spirit film.
Yeah. That seems like that does not make me want to watch that movie at all. That is not a glowing endorsement.
Well, I mean in the sense that it's completely insane. Like, it's a more legible story, and it's a lot more fun. But, like, in terms of batshit insaniness, it's batshit insane.
No, I got you there. I've seen, like, clips from that where it's like, alright, baby face, and it's got, like, literally a baby's head and shit like that. Yeah, it's fucking weird.
That was the running gag with Tracy's with Rogues Gallery, because they're all, like, they look stupid, and they have all these dumb names to go along with their weird faces.
Yeah. No, but this is up there. I was really not sure what this was going to be because, like, I don't want to say this movie has a reputation, but, like, I've never heard anyone say much at all positive about it. I've never heard anyone really give a glowing endorsement of the Shadow movie with Alec Baldwin. And it's kind of just fallen off the radar, hasn't it?
Yeah, I don't see it anywhere. Like, it's never played on like any channel. Well, I'd mention it's like, the what now? Like, that had a movie?
Yeah, it's crazy because, like, it's so much better than all of the Burton Batman movies. Like by a stretch. Like, I don't hate Batman 89 or anything, but it's certainly got a lot of problems. This is this is a pretty fucking solid ass movie, and in a lot of ways, I think it's kind of ahead of its time.
In a weird way, I feel like this movie is what the '89 Batman movie was trying to be, like, in vice versa. Like, this is what it was trying. Like, if we had the Shadow horribly killing people, we'd have been like, yeah, that's the Shadow. That's what he's supposed to do.
No, but just like so much of this, I was really surprised to see because it's 90s Hollywood, which was just trying to be 80s Hollywood but worse.
That's a great. I love that.
Well, like I don't know, it just seems like this movie could be made today and be just as good, but like damn, there's actual Asian actors playing Asian characters. I can't believe it. I don't know like why that is so surprising to see on film, but damn.
And in no less 90s era Hollywood, they weren't race changing. What?
I know, right?
It was like, now I know why it's so buried, because it's like, oh, we were actually, tolerant of races in the 90s, in this 90s film. Don't let anyone see it.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I was really getting ready for some cringe when Alec Baldwin's character is first introduced. And he's, like, in a fucking opium den. And he's got, like, the Fu Manchu fingernails and shit. I was like, oh no, what's this gonna be? And then, like, they never really explain what exactly his background is. But they clearly establish he's, like, an immigrant there that kind of took over or something.
Well, okay, so for understanding the Shadow, he was a dude who went to this place called Shambhala in, like, the Himalayas. And in Shambhala, you have two choices. You can either redeem yourself or you can die. So the Shadow, like, when he used to be Lamont Cranston, he trained himself in there and kind of he kind of acclimated to Asian culture. So that's why he had the Fu Manchu look going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think that really establishes what's going on in the movie.
But like, for reference, like I was telling you, because you wanted some understanding of why he had the whole Pai Mei motherfucking look.
Yeah, and like I think the way they just show it in the movie, and they kind of dance around. He's like, those 7 years after the war, I never asked you what was going on. I'm like, yeah, I never asked you about that time you were fucking opium kingpin. Like that was weird. So it's like the idea that somehow or other in, I think it's supposed to be World War I, he gets like just lost in the East in Tibet and becomes an opium kingpin and then finds God and becomes the Shadow, was basically his background as far as this movie's concerned.
In terms of that continuity, it's a little more in the pulps.
Yeah, and I assume so.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier that he has a different secret identity in the pulps. His name is Kent Allard, and he basically assumes the identity of a separate guy whose name is Lamont Cranston. If you ever saw the Russell Crowe Robin Hood movie, it's basically that, which is kind of interesting. I can see why they kind of just simplified it in the movie, because that could have been a little confusing, I think. Like, there's this other guy who looks a lot like Lamont Cranston, and he comes back and he just takes over his identity, and somehow everyone who knew Lamont Cranston doesn't question it and doesn't say, hey, you're not Lamont Cranston. So, like, I think it's a neat idea, but I can also see why they just said, no, we're just going to streamline this a little bit.
No, that's totally fine. That does seem needlessly complicated for the purposes of a movie.
Especially like in a 90s action film, like there's no way they would try to do the like mental dichotomy between all of those characters. And do it right.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know, like the background thing, like again, when Alec Baldwin first shows up and he's got like the long fingernails and I'm like, oh no, this isn't gonna go well. And then, I was reasonably impressed. Like I knew, I saw Tim Curry's name coming up on the intro credits, and then they're like, oh, this is the silver sarcophagus of Genghis Khan, and like they make a really big deal about who Genghis Khan's about to be. Like, oh no, Tim Curry, please don't do this to me. And then it's not Tim Curry. I'm like, okay, wow, I'm so surprised and impressed with 90s Hollywood right now that they actually cast Asian people to play Asian people. That was legitimately impressive and kind of hilarious that it was so. So no, like in the terms of the casting, and it's casted really, really well. Dynamite cast. Ian McKellen's in this. Tim Curry, Alec Baldwin. Why wasn't Alec Baldwin in more superhero stuff? Like he really had that like classic, Hollywood kind of like leading man style to him back at that age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, like, when you think people who could play superhero roles, Alec Baldwin's not a name you initially think of. But when you watch this, I'm like, yeah, it's like, why didn't I think of this sooner? He's really good at it.
He kills it. And, like, I was watching this, and I don't think he could play old Bruce Wayne, but damn, I could totally see Alec Baldwin as Bruce Wayne. I don't know if he could pull Batman off, but I could really see him pulling a Bruce Wayne. So that was kind of cool. Then there's like just other stuff that I thought was just, really, really interesting about this movie. It's got a really good sense of direction.
Mm-hmm.
I like a lot of the kind of trippy ass visuals here. There's that shot in the hotel when Khan is like preparing a ceremony or some shit, and like it's just super abstract, and you see all like these black squares with these like silver highlights to them, and the like camera starts pulling into it. It's just a really, really immersive, trippy ass shot. It was really cool to see stuff like that. There's a real sense of visual style to this movie.
You're talking about the scene where the rug like starts to morph while he's sitting on it. Yeah, it's so
yeah,
weird.
because it's like his robe.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool. The whole gimmick with the knife was pretty neat. I love a lot of the shots of the what is it, the Cobalt Club or whatever. That place looked gorgeous, the way they shot it and lit it and everything. I was really impressed with the visuals of this.
Yeah, like, they definitely were trying to emulate a lot of, like, the Tim Burton Batman angles, but at the same time, like, it feels very, like, noirish at the same time.
You know what it reminds me of, and I begin to wonder if there's any connection between these two films, is Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow?
I don't think there's any, like, connection there, but it definitely, like, Sky Captain does, follow that kind of pulp thing.
Yeah, and it has a similar look to it, like the kind of tint they use of the color tint for the film. It just looks a certain way. It's very warm. So there's just a really intense level of attention to detail here for a bunch of the aesthetics of this film. I was very impressed.
Yeah. I never thought about Sky Captain because that's a movie I've only seen once and didn't see it until quite a bit later. But now that you mention it, and I think that movie was going for a very 1930s pre-World War II vibe, and so I can kind of see they've got the similar aesthetic. That movie may not have been thinking of this movie, but they were both definitely inspired by the same sources for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. And it's just got a very similar palette and stuff, which is what made me think of it. So yeah, I was really impressed with this film. It's certainly not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I was like not sure what to expect. Got a little worried in the beginning, and then just overall, I was really impressed by the end of it. I was quite pleased. But Ruben, why don't you take us somewhere else on this then?
Well, you mentioned the cast, and I should say it's really surprising to me that we've got all these A-list actors, like leading actors, who are like they're in this movie, but they are very little in it. Like Tim Curry is in it, but he for only like 5 to 10 minutes in the whole movie. And then like I guess with Ian McKellen, it's a little more understandable because while he was doing a lot of stuff in the 80s, he wasn't really well known until the 1-2 punch of the X-Men and the Lord of the Rings. He was in stuff like Apt Pupil and this.
Oh, Apt Pupil is a great fucking movie.
Yeah, and like there's a movie I really love with Kate Beckinsale called Cold Comfort Farm that he's in, and he's hilarious in it. And that was before Lord of the Rings and X-Men, but I feel like he didn't become a household name that people knew until those franchises. And so it's a little bit more understandable that he's playing a minor role here. But Tim Curry, everyone knew who he was. Like he had been in a, Clue, Rocky Horror, everyone knew who he was. And he's, I was reading, apparently he and Ian McKellen had been in stuff before, but the main reason Tim Curry was in this was to work with Ian McKellen again. But then Peter Boyle, he's in it, and he was the father in Everybody Loves Raymond. I know him more. He was in Young Frankenstein. He's a monster.
Yeah.
But he's in it, and I guess it's more understandable that he's kind of a side character because I feel like he was never as much of a leading man as Tim Curry and Ian McKellen are. But it seems like we've got a lot of hey, it's that guy in this movie, and I'm kind of surprised by it every time someone like that shows up here.
Yeah. It's also funny to note, when you were talking about Tim Curry has such an X amount of time in here. It's funny too because in the '90s he was one of those big actors. He had done he had done Pennywise around this time. He had done
Muppet Treasure Island, I think, was around this time.
Yeah, Muppet Treasure Island, Hook. No, wait, he wasn't in Hook. Shit.
It's good.
I know he was. No, you're right. He was playing Hook in Treasure Island. That's why I said Hook.
He was a minor role in Home Alone 2, I think.
Yeah. Point being is that he was a big name in the '90s. He was one of those big character actors, and it was it's kind of like this movie did the same thing with what Force Awakens did, where it gave big name actors these kind of bit roles.
Yeah. And it's weird because so much of this movie is focused on Alec Baldwin's character that there's very little screen time for anyone else. It's pretty much him and Khan are the main characters of the whole movie, and god damn do they have a great screen dynamic together. I really need to look into what else the guy playing Khan is in, because he is a really fun actor. He hams up the shit out of it, and he gets every ounce of attention he deserves.
My favorite
bite of cheese sandwich.
My favorite scene with him was when when Alec Baldwin says, "Oh, that knife." Right then, I'm like, "Oh yeah, things are about to get good." And then he says, "Oh yes, I took it from the Tolku. Correction, I took it out of the Tolku." I'm just like, "Oh, that's a killer line. I love that so much."
Yeah, that one's good. I like that tie. Oh yeah, Brooks Brothers. Is that in Midtown? It's just, there's such a casual sense of conversation between the two of them. It's great.
And I love when he insists on paying for the drink. It's like he, at this point, the Shadow knows that this guy is trouble and he's probably going to try and destroy the world. But then he's like, no, I'm paying you for the drink you gave me. I'm a gentleman. I may be trying to kill everyone, but I'm going to pay. I've got some moral code. I love that.
That was good. I love that, at one point they're sitting in a restaurant together dressed exactly the same. I thought that was hilarious. And then it's the way Alec Baldwin plays the scenes that are so counterintuitive to the way you'd expect the scenes to go down, because they begin with so much tension, and then Alec Baldwin just kind of undercuts it with such a casual attitude that's not casual at all, because you can tell inside he's screaming. And then at the same time you've got the guy playing Khan there, and he's just going along with it. And it's such an interesting dynamic because he's not like that with anyone else. Everyone else he's screaming his head off at or trying to kill in an instant. So when they're in the restaurant together and Alec Baldwin's with "You sent Lane to kill me." It's just it's so incidental, and he's like, no. I sent her to be killed by you. I don't know. They got such a fun dynamic together, and I'm not sure how much of it's the writing and how much of it's the performance, but I really like both of them together on screen in those moments.
Yeah, and so I'd seen other people on the internet point this out before, but this is a really interesting pairing where it actually feels like these two have a lot in common. Like if you look at like the Sam Raimi, the first Spider-Man movie, where the Green Goblin is asking Spider-Man to join him for some reason, it doesn't really make sense. They don't have a lot in common other than they both have superpowers. But here you've got, like, for a good chunk of the movie, Khan is saying like, you and I should be working together. And it makes sense that he's asking him that because he knows that the Shadow used to be a warlord and did his fair share of killing and is a legend towards, like, Khan is respecting this guy because of, like, his past as a evil dictator, not because of his superpowers. And so I feel like that is a precursor, and I don't really, I guess that's a trope of superhero stories that seems like it's really present in a lot of stories, but I really couldn't point you to any other examples of it other than like the Raimi Spider-Man movie. But I feel like it's something that has a reputation, and here I feel like it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I don't know, like, yeah, you got me wondering where else it's come up, because I've definitely seen it in a million things. I think it might be more common in television than it is in movies.
Yeah, probably. I feel like maybe it's kind of touched on in the X-Men movies, where at the very least, Magneto is telling the X-Men, you don't understand why I'm doing this. So it's not necessarily join me, but it's more like, you guys need to understand why I'm doing it. But it is a trope that I feel like is kind of, it seems tried and true, but then when I try and think of examples of it, it's like, no, it's not as popular as I thought. But you're right, I bet it's more popular in superhero TV or just like action adventure TV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I feel. And so, and like, this movie might be responsible for why it's not used as much, is because it's just kind of like such a go-to in other things, and so this is one of the only movies to actually do it and have it make any sense. But yeah, those two just are super fun together. Alright, so let me ask this question, because it is scraping at the back of my head, and I got nothing. I got absolutely no idea why. Why the fuck does his face change when he becomes the Shadow?
Deadpoolzilla, do you know?
Yeah, it's part of his abilities that he learned in Shambhala. It's
Okay.
They don't really explain it, but it's like he's a man of a thousand faces. It's very inspired by Lon Chaney.
Okay. Because, like, I was trying to figure out if there was some significance to that, especially with the way they, like, end it with the image of the Shadow's eyes and all that stuff. I'm like, is this, like, an iconic look from the comics or something? Like, why does his face change? I don't get it. And they make such a big deal out of it. I'm sitting there wondering, because it looks different enough. I'm like, is this like an actor that's played the Shadow before and they brought him back and just kind of justified it in the plot, or what is going on here?
No, that's just one. This is one of the drawbacks I have with this film, is that they don't explain a lot with the Shadow and his abilities, because they're kind of out there sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe. Oh, go ahead.
Like, the whole thing with the opening where he's kind of like mentally influenced one of the guys, I was like, man, I wish you explained that a little more. That's the problem. One of the problems with this movie, and I'm sorry to cut you off again, Ruby, I was just like, the problem is that, yes, the face changing thing, that's a thing that happens in the stories of the Shadow. It's just one of his things he can do. It's just a power. It's not like, oh, look at that. It's more like, oh, it's just a thing, but they don't tell the audience, and not everyone is well versed in the Shadow, lore. It's a known name, but no one really like knows about. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, everyone knows Bruce Wayne's parents are dead and he has a Batcave. No one knows that kind of details about the Shadow.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
It's a dude with a hat and two guns and a really big nose. That's all you know about. That's the general consensus.
Yeah.
And I think what you just said about his physical appearance might be the big reason why they're changing his appearance here. Like, apparently, either in the pulps or the radio show, apparently it was like a notable thing. Like, he has a big nose, and so like, hey, Alec Baldwin doesn't have a giant nose, so like, let's have him like psychically change his face whenever he becomes the Shadow. Why? I don't know. Who cares? Like, we just have to have the big nose. And maybe that's something that like in the early 2000s, like in what I like to call like the huge course correction after Batman and Robin, where it's like, oh crap, people don't like superheroes, so we have to throw the black leather on everything, and we can't do anything comic book accurate at all. So like then people were complaining like, well, why isn't Elektra wearing a red costume and stuff like that? And so maybe this was like a precursor to that. Like, we have to have the Shadow has a big nose because that's like one of the things people know about him. And does it make any sense? Absolutely not. Like, not even like if you say like, well, the Shadow learned how to bend people's minds and stuff. Yeah, but why does he make his nose big whenever he becomes a Shadow? So the best thing I can come up with is they're just trying to be a little bit accurate to the source material. But I feel like they could have done this without actually like, maybe they could have just thrown in a line where he's talking to Margot and he says, yeah, I changed my face so that people won't recognize me. Like, my uncle is on the police force, and like if he sees the Shadow, he's not going to immediately say that looks like my nephew or something like that. Like, they could have thrown in a quick line.
Well, that's the thing, is like they really don't do a ton to, like all right, so this is both a positive and a negative, I feel. Because the film does a lot to just show, not tell, exactly what his powers are and his weaknesses. Like, they do a good job of establishing that he's super powerful as the Shadow running around on the bridge, kicking the shit out of the guy early on in the movie. But then the next time you see him start using those powers, he's vulnerable because they shine a light on him, which catches him in a spot, and then they're able to attack his Shadow, and that shows a weakness. So I thought that was kind of interesting on some level. But then when you have really, really weird powers, like he changes his face, that starts to make you wonder exactly what the purpose of it is, and they don't really give you an explanation for it. They just show you him changing his face, and they establish that he has to be in control of his powers to be able to do it, right? So I thought that was really, really, it was a positive and a negative, because I got a sense that, okay, he's got some kind of level of telepathy and mind control. And that was pretty easily established. And he's got some kind of essentially invisibility and obviously some level of enhanced strength. But they don't really lay it all out for you, which is fair. You don't have to do that. And I don't mind film asking you to do a little bit more work, but there does get to be a line somewhere. And I feel it didn't necessarily cross it, but it got right up to that,
Mm-hmm. This is getting a little bit away from the main topic of this movie, but in this day and age, I get really sick and tired of seeing like studios try and build a shared universe in reaction to like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Most of the time, whenever I see like such and such wants to do a shared universe, like the Robin Hood shared universe that they want to do, or the monster universe that fell apart, most of the time I just roll my eyes at that, like, yeah, good luck. But I would really love to see them try to do a 1930s superhero shared universe with like the Shadow or Doc Savage or the Green Hornet or the Phantom. I think if they did that, I don't think it would work nowadays because you've got so many studios trying to franchise like that. But I think that would be like one of the only times I would actually be interested in seeing that be attempted.
I mean, I could dig it. I really can't get enough superhero stuff, so I'll take it. And I don't know, it'd be interesting to see them reboot the Shadow.
Yeah.
I'd watch it.
I have no idea who they get to be the Shadow, but I'd watch it too.
Yeah. I don't know, yeah, who you could get, honestly. But it'd be kind of neat, like if you did it like a hard R film, because
Ooh, yeah.
yeah, like I would be down for more R-rated superhero films. They are profitable, and hey, Fox, you're now under Disney, and you now have to give back Fantastic Four and X-Men. How about try to do Pulp Universe or something like that?
Yeah. I don't care which studio does it. I don't know who owns the rights to any of those characters, but I'd
Don't give it to
love
Sony. Don't give it to Sony.
And I just love period superhero movies. I feel like I can count 5 maybe that we've had. I guess if you count like something in the 80s as a period movie, we've had a few more, but I really love like the World War II era. Like, we mentioned like the Phantom, the Rocketeer, the Shadow. I'd really love to see more stuff done in that era. I love that style.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. One pulp character I want to see get a film, The Spider. Especially if you guys need to find the David Liss Dynamite comics of The Spider. Oh my god, that is an amazing comic.
I don't think I've all right, so here's dirty confession time. As much as I don't know about the Shadow, I still know of the Shadow. I don't even fucking have a mental image of the Spider.
Okay.
Oh, he looks really cool. You should Google him.
Imagine if you gave the Shadow a cape, but with Spider-Man's web design and with a mask as well. That's the Spider.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can send you a picture. I actually do have the first trade of the David Liss series. I just haven't read it yet, but I have only heard really good things about that series. But from what I've heard, Ian, he's basically a different version of the Shadow. Like, he's got the fedora, he kills bad guys, he in the 1930s, except I think in this comic book series that Deadpool is talking about might be set in the present day, but I think the original character was set in 30s.
Yeah. There's actually like in one of the issues, I think issue 9, he's trying to find a serial killer who is burying people alive, and he finds him, and the dude's masturbating on a woman's buried grave, and it just freaks him the fuck out. He's like, dude, I can't. Like, he drops his guns and leaves. It just freaks him out so bad.
Wow. Okay, so back to the Shadow then. So if they were to do a reboot of this, would you want it to be more serious, or do you kind of like the tone that they've got here, where it's just a little cheesy? Well, not a little. It's a lot cheesy, but a fun cheesy.
I like the tone that we have here.
Yeah.
I like the tone, but at the same time, I'm like, man, they would really miss the mark this day and age if they tried to do that. Like,
yeah,
you would need someone who, like, the one person that could probably do a good Shadow film, and this is a person who's tried to make a Shadow film, is Sam Raimi.
Really?
Have you seen Darkman, Ian?
Yeah, Darkman is pretty much was what he wanted to do with the Shadow, but they didn't let him.
Which,
never knew it.
When this movie came out, you had Evil Dead. I was going to say no one knew who Sam Raimi was, but he had done Evil Dead, so I guess he had a couple of movies under his belt. So I'm kind of surprised that they just flat out said no.
Surprising.
But yeah, I think with this movie, the tone is just it reminds me of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where like you have serious movies, but you also have a lot of levity. Like, a lot of people will compare like the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies to like the DC movies, where it's like it's all grim and gritty all the time, and there's hardly any humor or any jokes at all. And the Marvel movies, they almost have it down to a science, where it's like, okay, we need to have a character crack a joke now, and most of the time I'd say it works. And so like they have a good ratio of like, here's when it needs to be serious and here's when it can be a little bit goofy. And I feel like this movie has a similar ratio that works out very well, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's got just enough humor that it does work for you. I'm not a huge fan of the actress in this. She's fine. She's kind of typically written, so she doesn't get a lot to really grab your interest with, but she's got her moments that I quite liked, like when she's changing in the one room and she's like got to argue with him about why she gets to be his sidekick now. I thought that was pretty good. And like the humorous moment there when she like describes this very sexy dream because she's clearly tried to seduce him to try to get him to go along with her, and then he's like, I dreamed I ripped off my face and there was another man. It's like, that was a really, really funny bit right there. Yeah. And also, that scene where he rips off his face is really fucking cool.
Yeah.
I'm looking to see, speaking of her, do you think it's a little bit, not cliche, contrived? Do you think it's a little contrived that she has telepathy, that like out of all the people he could have met in New York, that he happens to meet someone who can uncover his secret identity?
Well, it's not only that she has telepathy, but she's of course connected to the character that's necessary to the villain's plot to destroy New York City and yada 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 yada.
That's female contrivance 101.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. She's pretty typical. She's not bad. She's just pretty damn typical, no matter how you slice it, I feel.
I don't mean it like when I say female contrivance. I mean like it's like it was typical for a female character to be written like that in almost every like action film. Like, oh, it's you're a vital piece to this plot. You're more of a plot device than you are a character.
Yeah, I kind of feel that.
You're a plot device the hero can fuck. That is your whole thing in this film.
I do like that she's not a damsel. In fact, he has to call her for help when he's in that tank of water. So I do like that we don't have the typical scene of her needing him to save her. So that's a kind of, this is ahead of its time, because even in the 21st century, we've gotten away from it now, but especially in the early 21st century, it was like, you got a woman in there, oh, she needs to be saved by the hero, you got to do it. Like that's part of the contract.
Yeah, no, you're right. I thought that was pretty good. Also, I like that whole scene when he's in the water tank, though it is surprising Tim Curry's so effectively able to just almost kill him. Like, just damn. I was not expecting that, but that was kind of cool. I don't know how much I believe the whole I can breathe through the bullet hole bit, but it was pretty neat. I don't think I've seen that, and I have no idea how conceivably possible that actually is. I guess I begin to wonder, well, if it works, why would you stop? But I don't know. That was a weird moment in that whole thing, but I don't know. I like it that she doesn't get there just in time before the water fills up. She gets there too late because the tank's already full, and I like that it increases the drama and stuff. But it was weird. I don't think I've ever seen anything deal with that before. It's like, okay, they're drowning, but they have a tiny little air hole. I don't know. It was unique in that way.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend us trying it on Mythbusters, but I would love to know if that works. Just in case I'm in a tank and
science, Ruben.
Yeah,
for science.
Also, speaking of things that I don't know if it's a minor plot hole. So, like the hotel that is the scene of the final act of the movie. We find out that pretty much everyone in New York has been mind controlled to forget that hotel exists, including the Shadow. And then he kind of starts to see through the illusion. They kind of touch on this, like everyone remembers that it was built, and then people just kind of assume that it was torn down, but they don't really remember when. And they don't actually go into when the mind control started, but we know that Khan doesn't come into New York until the movie starts. So I do want to know, how long has this hotel been erased from everyone's memory? Because he's only been in New York for, you know, a few weeks or less than that. And so, like, his plan has been going for a little longer, presumably. But, like, is he able to mind control everyone in New York from where he was in the Middle East? And that's something that they kind of, it's like you said earlier, this movie kind of jump ropes with show, don't tell. Sometimes they show just the right amount. Sometimes they don't show enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can tell this director really does have a soft spot for visual storytelling first. Like, they do that a lot with the whole Dakota Rings thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't remember exactly what the scene was, but that's it. It's when we're, like, seeing the aftermath of the suicide in the museum, and, like, you got the one police officer who kind of, like, points at something, and then he leaves the scene and he goes and writes a note to the shadow, and it kind of goes down the chain and stuff. Like, before he even leaves or anything, it's just perfectly framed. He points and you see the ring that all of the Shadow's agents wear. Mm-hmm. And they don't draw any attention to it. You just see it. And so you know that guy's an agent of the Shadow. And so just a little, like, there's a lot of really great visual storytelling moments like that, that I do feel like maybe the director leans too heavily on, or expects too much to be picked up from, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, like, one that is probably something the audience can pick up on, but the doctor at the end, spoilers, but Khan does not die, but he gets a lobotomy so that he can't use his telepathy. And then, like, at first you're thinking, oh, well, the doctor just had to do that surgery to save his life because there was a huge chunk of glass that hit his head. But then you see the little ring on his hand as he's signing a piece of paper. It's like, oh, okay, he was doing it because he works for the Shadow. And, like, presumably audiences could figure that one out just, like, looking at the screen. But, like, the cop one, I hadn't noticed that one, that he was wearing a ring on his hand.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I thought that was really cool. Alright, so what else? Deadpoolzilla, why don't you take us somewhere on this movie?
We've gone everywhere I could possibly think we could go.
Well, let me ask this, because this is a movie, I don't know how it did financially, but I was a little surprised because, like we said, we all seem to have enjoyed it. I'm curious if they were ever wanting to do a sequel, or if they just said, no, like, this was fine, it did okay, but we're not gonna try doing another one. Because nowadays, like, unless it just bombed, or even if it just barely broke even, then they would probably go ahead and be talking about a sequel, like, while it was still in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like, yeah. it did not do great. That was the problem, is that this film didn't do well, like, critic wise or financially. So that was why it never got a sequel, and why no one ever talks about it, which sucks. Because again, I think this movie's really underrated.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's just really ahead of its time. I think this could come out today, right now, as is, and do really well. You know, like, even the CG in it, like, it's dated, but it's not super dated. The knife that kind of comes alive doesn't look bad. There's some problem with interaction as opposed to animation, particularly in the beginning when, like, he's trying to hold the knife and stuff in the beginning, and, like, you can clearly tell Alec Baldwin's just holding on to the air. So there's some problems there with some of the CG integration. I think some of the matte paintings kind of give themselves away, but there's a certain charm to those that works for me. So even effects-wise, I think this holds up reasonably well. Far from perfect, but totally fine and passable, if nothing else. I mean, I've watched this on my 4K television, and that can really destroy an older movie's effects for me a lot of the times. And it didn't. I thought it looked really good, especially given the time. You know, it's 94. There's definitely CG in the movie, but it's not overly dependent on CG. I was really impressed with this one.
Yeah. I was looking at the budget. Apparently, it was a $25 million budget, and overall worldwide it grossed 48 million, which sounds good. But I've heard friends of mine who are more knowledgeable about this kind of thing than I am. They say that for a movie to be considered successful, it generally has to gross about twice the budget. I feel like that's like really excessive, but I don't know anything about movies. So, maybe that's true. Maybe a studio considers it a failure if it doesn't make twice the budget. I I know I've seen some movies that have a shoestring budget, and then they make just if they make double that, then it's like, hey, this is awesome. But this had a larger budget, so maybe they were thinking that it would be too much to try and do another movie.
Mm-hmm. More than likely. Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know enough about the reaction to this. What little I've heard of how people reacted to it, I've kind of heard this movie used as the butt of a joke, but I think that it's more just people haven't seen it. Like I feel like the people I've heard in passing joke about this movie probably just don't know about it and just think it's bad because of a reputation.
Mm-hmm.
Or people just don't even remember it, which is, again, like we said at the beginning, it's kind of unfortunate because it's a bit of a hidden gem.
Yeah, that's weird that you say that, like, people kind of joke about it, because I had never heard anyone say anything bad about it. Like you were saying earlier that you hadn't heard a whole lot of good about it, but I don't hear people talk about it. But the few people I have heard talk about it generally seem to like it. So I'm kind of surprised that you've heard people not like it.
I've just heard like general, like, oh yeah, like The Shadow with Alec Baldwin, like kind of disparaging remarks in general without anything specific. And I feel like it's maybe just like, I mean, admittedly, Alec Baldwin, again, doesn't sound like the guy you'd go to for a superhero movie. The Shadow isn't exactly a property most people care about. So it does sound like kind of a stinker idea just on the surface of it.
Mm-hmm.
But really, when you sit down and watch the movie, give it a chance, it quite works.
Yeah, that sounds to me like people who haven't seen the movie are just like, oh, 90s superhero movie that you probably haven't heard of before. Disparaging remark, like it almost sounds like people who just like their gut instinct is to say, well, if it's a superhero movie from before 2005, then it's probably not very good. But this is actually not a bad movie.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I don't think it gets the love that it deserves.
Yeah, okay. Well, like Deadpool said, we really did cover a lot on this. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else really worth talking about. Oh, okay, I do have one more other thing. Tim Curry's death is absolutely absurd, and I love it.
Oh, if you're going to kill off Tim Curry, you might as well do it in a spectacular fashion, am I right?
Yeah, it's just like, I don't know did the Shadow make him go crazy? Or does that just Tim Curry deciding, okay, I'm done recording now. I'm just gonna write myself out of the movie.
I think it is it's a combination of because Tim Curry thinks like, yeah, I did it. I defeated him. And then he hears like, wait, he's here in this building right now? Uh-oh. And then he's paranoid because you can't see him coming. And so like he kind of just, like you said, he just goes crazy, and then the Shadow just pushes him just a little bit, makes him hallucinate that exit sign. And I guess it is a little cheesy. Like you mentioned that it's cheesy earlier, and I'd forgotten how cheesy that was. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't care. I loved it. It was super fun. He did go a little Pennywise for a second there as he was about to kill himself, though. That was kind of cool. All right. Yeah, I really don't have anything else, so I guess we'll just go ahead and go on to ratings here. This be a shorter episode. I'll give this 4 out of 5 mind-controlled daggers.
Dang it, I was going to do the dagger. All right. Deadpoolzilla, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I will give it 4 out of 5 breathable bullet holes.
Oh, good. I like this movie a lot, so I'm gonna give it 5 out of 5 silver sarcophagi.
Nice, nice. All right. Well, everyone, thanks very much for watching. Until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
I'm the Comics Kid 2099.
And I am the Don Juan of Comic-Con.
And we are your geeky gentlemen, and we will be discussing things.